Hi everyone. I'm going to try to give you the notes that you are missing from the other classes today. I'm going to talk rather quickly and say more than I'd like to because this is my first time. But hopefully you can replay this link when you finish so you can catch anything that you don't catch. Vocab test is going to be tomorrow. So that's the good news. I do apologize for not posting that online like I said I would. So that's one thing. Huck Finn test, don't forget, is Friday, and that's non-negotiable. And the project is due on Monday. I will have rubrics tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a very full day, though, because we have the quiz, and then we have entry 8 and 10 due in the journal packet. So I want you to think about a couple things with the novel. Go to chapter 28, if you would. And I want you to look on page 187. 187. And on page 187 of my book, that is where he's starting to talk to Mary Jane, and they are making a plan for how to get rid of the Duke and the Dauphin. Down near the bottom of the page, page 186, he says that I've got to get you to go away for 4 days. And she's like, 4 days? Why, I'd stay a year. And now if you'd go to page 189, I just like this line. It really has nothing to do with Huck's maturity, but in the middle of the page, he says to Mary Jane, why do you reckon I wanted you to go at all, meaning leave town for a little while? She said, well, I never thought, and come to think, I don't know. What is it? Well, it's because you ain't one of those leather-faced people. I don't want no better book than what your face is. A body can sit down and read off it like coarse print. And maybe you've heard the phrase, read you like a book, and that's what Twain is referring to here, that Mary Jane is very transparent, and Huck realizes that and doesn't want Mary Jane to potentially give them away in any reason. Then at the end of page 194, he talks about Tom Sawyer again, wondering what Tom Sawyer would do, because he's trying to solve all this pretty neatly with the Wilkses and Mary Jane and the Duke and the Dauphin and get rid of them. But again, he always goes back to what Tom Sawyer would do. He says he would have thrown more style in it than Huck managed. But I think what Huck did was pretty straightforward and very successful. So now if you go to page 191, and on this one, she says that Mary Jane says she's going to pray for him. It's near the top of the page. I'll pray for you. And she was gone, pray for me. I reckon if she'd had known that, known me, she'd have taken a job that was more nearer her size. And this is the humor of Twain coming through, that Huck thinks that praying for her is such a big job that someone like Mary Jane can't do it, shouldn't do it, and that it's a pretty daunting task. I think he realizes what he is. The whole section with the end of the Wilkes and the brothers showing up and them trying to prove the truth of who is who is, I think, fairly straightforward. Huck's done the right thing by burying the gold in the coffin, and that's what allows him to escape, and he is really excited about being able to escape. And if you go to page 204 at the end, he says in 2 seconds, and this is the end of chapter 29 on page 204, the end of 2 seconds, away we went, a-sliding down the river, and it did seem so good to be free again, and all by ourselves on the big river, no one to bother us. I had to skip around a bit and jump up and crack my heels a few times. I couldn't help it. But about the third crack, I noticed a sound that I knowed mighty well and held my breath and listened and waited. And sure enough, when the next flash busted out over the water, here they come, and just a-laying to their oars and making their skiff hum, it was the King and the Duke. So I wilted right down into the planks then and give up, and it was all I could do to keep from crying. They thought they'd gotten away from the Duke and the King, but they were found out and they had to leave town just as quickly as Jim and Huck. And so he is still married, essentially, to them and can't let go of them. And the problem is that then what happens is that Jim gets sold, and they sell him for $40. And the number 40 is pretty important. It has biblical meanings, and we are going to see it several times in the end of the book, so please keep track of that. The climax of the story is on page 213 through 214. And this is when something monumental occurs that shows us that a character has changed. Huck decides he's going to write the letter to Miss Watson. And he has angst about writing it. He's had angst all along about what he should be doing with Jim, but he has this angst. And then he decides he's going to send it. And then on page 213 at the very bottom, he remembers all the things. He was thinking about all the things that Jim has done. The time he stood watch over him so he could go on sleeping, and the time he came up out of the fog, and then he saw him in the swamp where the feud was. And then he calls him honey, and he does things for him, and that he's good to him. And the times that Huck is good back to him. The top of 214, he said, I was the best friend old Jim ever had in the world, and the only one he's gotten out. And then I happened to look and see that paper. He tears up that paper and he says, all right then, I'll go to hell. This is the climax of the novel. This is where we show that he is not only giving up the constraints of society, but he's becoming his own person. He is doing what he thinks is right, not what anyone else thinks is right. And that's a really important part of the novel, and it shows his maturity and his development as a character.